Hello friends, my name is Bintou and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is an exciting one because I want to talk about the top 20 books that I have read in the year 2020. And I decided to go with 20. I originally wanted to do 10, but I couldn't actually whittle it down to 10. So 20 is perfect because it's the year 2020. Just for some context, I read a grand total of, so far, as I'm filming this video, of about 113 books in 2020. And so these 20 are the best of those books. And there are a lot of really good ones. Not all of them are new releases. New releases don't make up the vast majority of my reading, but there are some in here. And then there's some that I just hadn't ever gotten to until this year. And these books are in no particular order, so I don't have them ranked from number 20 to number 1 because it just would have taken me far too long to try and decide. Like, I have an idea of what my top 5 are somewhat, but there's no way I could put these in order from 20 all the way up to number 1. To be honest, all of these were fantastic, and if you pick up any one of them, I sincerely hope you end up enjoying them. I'll start with the 3 books that I physically have in my possession. So the first one is Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments by Saidiya Hartman. So the subtitle for this is Intimate Histories of Riotous Black Girls, Troublesome Women, and Queer Radicals. This was a very, very fascinating book. It is nonfiction. And I read this on the recommendation of one of my professors from my master's program in education. And the story basically follows the lives of young Black women mostly. Actually, I think it was all Black women in the city of New York and Philadelphia during the time of the Great Migration. And it talks about how they've led their lives, or specifically their intimate lives. So like their sex lives, the relationships that exist between these women and the men in their lives, and how it ran against what was considered traditional at the time. And she kind of takes an approach to it as like it was their way of experimenting and trying to survive given their circumstances. Very, very fascinating book. I took a ton of notes on this. You can see there's a lot of post-its on here. This is a book that I hope to reread again because I want to be able to read the stories as stories rather than taking such an academic approach to it like I did the first read around. So Wayward Lives, pretty awesome. Next on this list is Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, a rather recent read since this was just released in November, and fantastic. I mean, I've already talked about this like 5 times on my channel. It was an excellent addition to the Stormlight Archive series. This one focused on Venli in flashbacks. We also see a little bit more about Eshonai. We learn more about the night that Gavilar died that started the whole war that they're still fighting. And Navani, she was awesome in this. Loved her in this book. This was awesome. I'm trying to I have this habit of like spending 5 minutes describing a book, and it's totally unnecessary. And if I did that, this video is going to be like 2 hours long. So I'm trying to avoid that. That's why I'm not giving extreme detail on all of these books, kind of just talking about my favorite things about them. The third book that I have here is A Promised Land by Barack Obama. I haven't actually, at the time of filming, finished this. Probably by the time this video goes live, I will have finished it. I'm currently about a quarter of the way through. This is a long memoir, but it's really fascinating to read about his thoughts on pretty much all of the events leading up to and including his presidency. Currently, the parts that I'm in, it's right up until election night. I will say the writing in this is absolutely fantastic. And it's just cool to gain insight into the brain of a former president of the United States. I mean, whether you like him or not, I think it'll be really fascinating. So those are the 3 that I have physically. Most of the rest of these books I either read on my Kindle or I borrowed them from the library, and so I no longer have them in my possession, but we will make our way through the list. All right, so next is The Stand by Stephen King. And actually I think I have 2 Stephen King books on this list. So The Stand was the first book that I read of 2020, and I kept saying that it was my favorite book of 2020, and it's high up there. It's definitely in the top 5. The Stand was just a fascinating look into character development on a scale that I've never read in a book before, and that was probably my favorite thing about it. It is very long, and the ending is very disappointing, so that is something to watch out for, but I love the character so much that I didn't mind. I don't feel like the journey was a waste. It was really good up until like the last, I think it was only like 10-20 pages that kind of concluded the story, and it wasn't very well done. And then the other Stephen King book that I really, really loved this year was The Green Mile. This one I don't think is as popular as some of his other work, but I really, really enjoyed The Green Mile. And this is one where a very large black male, he gets arrested for the murder of these two young girls, but he claims to be innocent, and then the people that work at the prison start to believe that he is, but he is on death row. And then there's Old Sparky, the electric chair, where all of these death row inmates go to die. This book actually made me cry. It was just really, really sad to see how things played out for a lot of the characters in this book. I think this is probably one of the more underrated Stephen King books because it is my favorite so far of his work, or it is one of my favorites so far of his work for sure. Next, I've got 3 books on here that could be classified as memoir, so I'll address them. First, we have Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. This book was absolutely fantastic. I loved every moment of it. I listened to the audiobook as well while I was reading it. And this book pretty much tells the story of his early life in South Africa. And a lot of the stories center around his mother and kind of the difficulties that she had raising him, particularly because he was mixed at a time where it was illegal for a child to have black and white parents. The writing in this is absolutely fantastic, very comical. This is a book that you're gonna have an absolute blast reading through. Kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, we have In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. And this is a memoir as well, however, it's a lot sadder because this focuses on her relationship, an abusive queer relationship that she was in during her time in grad school. What I really loved about this book is just the way that it was written. It was a very uniquely written memoir. I can't say that I've ever read a memoir quite like this. And I feel like she really got through to me as a reader, everything that she was feeling, the angst, the anxiety, and the fear that she was feeling in the house that she was in with her partner. And then there's March by John Lewis, and this is a graphic novel. I don't know if it's a memoir necessarily, but it does tell the story of his early life, and this was absolutely fantastic. This is the one and only graphic novel that I have ever read, and I had picked up the second book and hadn't gotten to it before I had to return it to my library, but I need to pick it up again because I really do want to finish this graphic novel series. The first book was amazing. It centered on his early young childhood when he was being raised on the farm with his family, beginning to think about becoming a preacher when he was an adult, right up until him going to college and then participating in sit-ins. An awesome way to begin to learn about John Lewis. And I know he has another book, I think it's also an autobiography, but it's not a graphic novel, it's an actual book that I'm gonna hope to pick up in 2021 because his story is definitely one worth reading. All right, next let's discuss some of the nonfiction books that I read this year that I really enjoyed. We have Invisible Woman, which was a really good one. This book centers on the lack of research into, or the fact that a lot of research that is done for pretty much everything doesn't aggregate data by the genders. So it doesn't separate the data into male versus female. And so a lot of the times, things obviously affect men differently than they affect women. And so we've got a world based on data that was pretty much designed for men. And there are a lot of points that she raises in this book that I never considered, things like how public transit is designed and how it goes against the patterns of women and moms, and then things like unpaid work falling mostly on the shoulders of women rather than men. I think this is a really interesting book, whether you identify as women or men. There's definitely a lot to learn here. Then One Person No Vote, another rather recent read since I read this one in, I think it was at the very beginning of November, definitely before Election Day. And this book was just a really easy to understand and thorough overview of voter suppression in modern America. There's a little bit of the historical context in here as well, where she talks about tactics used during the Jim Crow era, but that's only in the first chapter. The rest of the book focuses on a lot of nearly present day stuff, like post-Obama presidency. And I just think this was extremely informative, particularly for anyone who is a voter. Definitely something to know. And we're living in a time where, you know, everywhere you look online, people are claiming voter fraud on a massive scale. And that makes something like this all the more important to read. Also, Not a Crime to Be Poor. I did a whole review on this book. This was a fantastic book. Another one that taught me a lot. This was focused on the criminal justice system in particular, and how poverty itself can be such a huge cause of people landing in the criminal justice system. And then of course, once you're in there, it kind of exacerbates it, making it impossible almost to get out, because if you can't afford to pay fines and fees, you end up back in jail. And then of course, if you end up in jail, you end up with a record that keeps you from being employed for many jobs, keeps you from also getting housing, and also talks about some of the changes in policy that led to such huge incarceration rates in the United States, as opposed to getting people the help they need, whether it's mental health or drugs or housing. It all somehow has fallen purview to the criminal justice system. Next, The Story of More. And this is a book about climate change. This was actually, it's the only climate book change that I've read in 2020. But the reason that I loved this one so much is because of the way that it was written. It was just so very easy to read and to understand that I went through this book in a matter of just 2 days. While there isn't anything groundbreakingly new in this book, it might be super helpful for anyone who doesn't know too much about climate change and wants to have it all covered in one easy to read or easy to understand book. But also the author interjects her own life experiences, particularly as someone who was born and raised in the Midwest. I think it was Iowa she's talking about. She talks about things that I just don't know, having been born and raised in a city, that I thought were really fascinating viewpoints. And that book was a 2020 release, I believe. And I picked that one up because it was in the Goodreads Choice Awards at some point this year. And then the last nonfiction book on this list is No Filter, The Inside Story of Instagram. This is another relatively recent read. I just read it in November, I believe. And the reason that I like this book is that it was just a very fascinating thing to read, because Instagram is something that I think many of us use. Certainly everyone knows what Instagram is. And this book pretty much details Instagram from the two founders at the very beginning all the way up until it got sold to Facebook for $1 billion. And then the two people that started the company left. Mostly because they were having so many disagreements with Zuckerberg at Facebook. I mean, seeing the social media giant that Instagram is today, and also hearing about what led to the CEOs resigning, certainly continues to not paint Zuckerberg in the best light at all. But it's really cool because I didn't know the kind of the mission or the story behind Instagram at the very start. I only know what Instagram is today, and as someone that's not a heavy Instagram user, I guess I never really cared before. But I'm hoping to actually get better at using Instagram in 2021. That'll be one of my goals, is to make my Bookstagram just a little bit better. I find it very difficult, surprisingly. I find BookTube almost easier, but it is what it is. Next, I've got some historical fiction books on here. The Murmur of Bees. I've said it before and I've said it again, and I'll say it yet again. The Murmur of Bees is the most beautifully written book that I read this entire year. It is a translated book from Spanish, and this book takes place during the 1918 Spanish flu. I actually did a video review on this. It was like one of my first videos on this channel, so it's not like super great. But the story mainly follows this young boy who was born with these special abilities to kind of predict things happening to the family around him, and yet he's outcast. Like, people are afraid of him because he's very different, and he's like followed by this swarm of bees, and that's where the title of the book comes from, Murmur of Bees. It's rather long, but it really is worth it. This is another one that is like top 5 books this year for sure. I love The Murmur of Bees so much. And then the book that I would put right beneath that in terms of like the most beautifully written books this year would be The Mountain Sing. And this was another relatively recent read, and The Mountain Sing is set in Vietnam during the rise of communism and the Vietnam War. and it follows this Vietnamese family and how they're dealing with the loss of their family members due to the war, struggling to kind of find food and stay alive during the famine, during the loss of their home, etc. This one is not a translated work, but it is the author's first work in English. And it also was released this year in 2020. Then there's the Book of Lost Saints. This was, I believe, the second book that I read in 2020. And I did a review on this one as well. The Book of Lost Saints was really nice as well. It was set between New Jersey and Cuba. And basically there is this guy, he's a DJ, and his aunt is attached to him as a ghost. He doesn't know who she is. He doesn't know much about her, but the story is told from his present day predicament and trying to learn more about his family and even going all the way to Cuba to do so. And then in the past for the aunt and her work in the Cuban Revolution and being one of the disappeared during that time period. And then the henna artist, another definite top 5. I feel like I may be over 5 in my top 5 at this point. I haven't really kept track, but you've also definitely, if you watch any of my videos, have heard me talk about the henna artist quite a bit since I've read it. And it really was that fantastic. So the henna artist is set in India, and it follows this young girl who is a henna artist. So she does henna for a lot of the wealthy people that live in the city that she's in. I forget the name of the city specifically that the book is set in. But then her younger sister comes to find her, a younger sister that she didn't know that she had. And so they're working together. She's helping raise this young girl, trying to send her to school, try to get her to kind of have a better life than she did. And yeah, it was just overall a very fascinating story to read from Lakshmi's point of view, the main character in this book. All right, I got 3 left. And the next one that I'll talk about is Kindred. So Kindred was the first ever and also first of this year Octavia E. Butler book that I read, and I loved this one. So in Kindred, there is this young African-American woman, and she gets like thrown back in time. So there's some time travel here to a plantation during the time of slavery, and one of the owners, I guess he is a relative of hers, I believe. So she's going back and forth between the 2 time periods. Anytime he like is in danger of dying, she shows up. And it's super weird because they kind of know she's not of that time period, but she also is Black, and so she's being treated as a slave. And then the amount of time that passes while she's in the past is like very, very little in the present, which becomes really important when her husband gets transported in time and then comes back. And the final 2 are romances of sorts. So first we have The Bride Test, which was my favorite, I think, contemporary romance that I read this year. And The Bride Test follows this Vietnamese girl. She comes to the United States because this woman wants her to marry her son. And so it's a romance book. She stays with him and is basically invading his personal space while he is coming to terms with the fact that he has feelings for her. And they have to decide whether or not they're going to get married before the summer is over, and she may have to return back to Vietnam. And Verity by Colleen Hoover. To be honest, this is mostly on here because no book has shocked me the way that Verity has shocked me, and so I am thoroughly impressed in that regard. Verity is it's a romance, but it's also a mystery thriller of sorts, so it's a thrilling romance, but not in the way that you might think. It involves a mother who is really in love with her husband, but also to the point where some suspicious things happen to the children. And she's just extremely jealous of their ability to take her husband's attention away. Overall, like during the book, it was really interesting, but it's really the end that leaves you wondering like what just happened and who do you trust? And it's just, yeah, I don't think any book that I've read this year has been able to do that quite the way that Verity have. And so so kudos to Colleen Hoover on that. I was impressed. All right, guys, so that's it. Those are the top 20 books that I've read in the year 2020. Even narrowing it down to 20 was pretty difficult, which actually I think that's a good thing because that means that I enjoyed almost all of the books that I read this year. In fact, by the time this video goes up, my top 5 worst books that I read in 2020 is already up. And of those 5, only 4 of them were like truly horrendous to me. personally. So overall, that's out of 112 books so far. I've enjoyed almost all of them. And so that's really awesome. I hope you guys have had as equally impressive reading years, and here is to some more reading in the year 2021. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.